Hello and welcome to another e-rev broadcast. Tonight we're bringing you Total War World in Conflict. I'm joined here with my co-caster, Blazing Kami. He's been playing with quite a few of the players in the WIC Total War tournament. And our video caster for tonight is Limek, and I am of course Just Add Water. We'll be commentating for you. Tonight's map is Xmas. I think we're playing two other maps in a best of three between the 51st Parachute Infantry Division and the 186th Russian Infantry Division. I'll hand it over to you, Kami, and let's give us a rundown of strategies.
Well, pretty much from what I've seen over the last bit here, the Russians like to go with a lot of AA, usually only one air player. They're very strong with their armor, usually going 3 armor players. The United States, on the other hand, usually uses 2 air players and also using lots of armor and support, but they like to use their artillery a little more than the Russians do. Key thing is watching Trekker and Rescue. They're both very good armor support players, definitely ones to watch. But also on the Russian team, a lot of the members who are going to be playing here tonight are from the 7th Spetsnaz, which is a company within the 51P, and they'll obviously they know how to fight together, and I expect them to have a lot of teamwork together tonight.
Alright, to give you guys a quick roster rundown, on the Russian side, the 51P, I got those mixed up earlier on. We have the Merc, Black Seal, Walk Dog, Night Owl, Plaza Incorporated, I believe that's how you pronounce it, and Max. Over on the USA side, on the 186, we have Trekker, Rescue, Hellhound 1812, Von Small, Raid JTC, and PDXA4. And then remember, as always, guys, you can hop on IRC pound e-rev and give us your shoutouts. We're on the Game Surge Network, pound e-rev. Send your shoutouts towards me, e-rev, Just Add Water, and I'll read them out on the air when there's a low point in the battle. So hop on IRC if you can, show us some support, and please visit our website, www.erev.tv, and register for the forums. Hand it back over to you, Blazing.
Yep, well, for this map on Xmas, for those of you who have played World in Conflict, you obviously know the tactics on this map. But in the center, the west suburb is usually where most of the action is, as well as around the bridges and the points around the bridges, which are farm and high school. Destroying those bridges are also going to be key. Controlling the bridges is a huge thing on this map, and also it's a good thing to watch the east suburb, because oftentimes the bleed is controlled based on who controls that point.
Alright, so we're just waiting. Looks like everyone's ready. We may have some server difficulties from the looks of it. I hope not. I hope we can get this week underway, but we'll just have to wait. Hopefully Maya's support can come through for us. But just looking at this map, it is a beautiful map set on Christmas type season. You have Santa's, lights on the houses, Christmas trees in the far background. You see dozens of houses with Christmas lights and a few trucks with Christmas lights. So it should be a good map for you viewers to watch, and plus it's at nighttime, so you'll see a lot of the big explosions, bigger, and it should be quite the view.
Yep, when the napalm drops on this map, it glows beautifully red, and definitely good to watch nukes on this map as well.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm just going to drop out, see if we have any shoutouts, but remember guys, hop on pound e-rev and go ahead and send us your shout out. I have one shout out here via Xfire. Let me go ahead and tab out. This is a shout out from Rubio. Shout out to Banff. I'll let you all figure what Banff stands for by yourselves. But let's go ahead. No shout outs as of yet. Remember guys, www.e-rev.tv. Register on our forum. Still just waiting for the server to get going. Again, I really hope this gets going. Total War battles are really fun to watch. It's 6v6 format, a little bigger than what most people are used to, but it's still quite a sight to watch. Great teamwork on both sides of these, on both teams, so we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, well, this patch was supposed to fix the server issues, but obviously, they're still having some trouble, some bugs.
Well, I also, I'm not sure, what were some of the balance issues that this latest patch addressed, do you know?
It wasn't as much balance issues as it was little fixes, I believe. For example, like for infantry only counts within a squad as one unit rather than each individual infantry. There was also an issue with air units being able to attack ground directly below them, I believe. I'm not exactly certain on that one. But for air players, obviously that's a concentration. As for the other things, I don't really have the list on me right now.
Alright. Let's just have to wait. Looks like we're gonna... I don't know what we're going to try here. Just wait on the word from my internet service. So if you're tuned in, I apologize for the delay. Just server issues that are outside our control, so we can't do much about it. Alright guys, just got word from Maya's Airborne. This problem should be fixed shortly, but just going to give you a quick rundown of upcoming events this week on e-rev. For those of you who play UT2K4, we have a TWO match coming up, 4v4 TIM, or 6v6 Onslaught ladder actually, Vox versus Khan. And we also have the e-rev COD2 North American All-Star game. It's going to be the players will be picked by e-rev through emails and by Gotfrag. That should be quite the battle to watch. Some of the best players in North America go out. Alright, we're just going to have Lymic and Blazin just go ahead and join a side, and they say that should resolve the issue.
Roger.
So we're just going to go ahead and join the side, and hopefully this fixes the issue. Just waiting on you, Kami.
Shoot, what's that button again?
I believe you're looking for your home button to choose sides.
It's the little thing that looks like a jacket right next to the magnifying glass at the lower left corner.
Yeah, I found it.
Alright, let's go back
Yes,
to
I've done it.
spectate. This
I've done it.
match is on the way. Alright, we're back in spectate. Again, sorry for the delay. We're going to have this battle started real soon as the countdown goes. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we're getting this match underway. Let's go ahead and take a look at these drop zones, see who's playing. And you see what roles they're playing.
Yeah, and it looks like pretty much what I figured from the Russians. They're going just one air player, it looks like, and concentrating mostly on armor and AA. As for the Americans, looking over.
Well, Looks on the American side, let me just get back on focus. Looks like we have one support player that looks to be Trekker. We have an armor player, PDX. Take a look for their other players. Not seeing them. Oh, there we go. We have an infantry player. That's Rescue. And we have another support player, Von Small. And we have another armor player, Raid. So they're pushing up onto the high school. And they're also on the farm. The Soviets trying to push into, I believe that's the east suburb and the west suburb right now. Let's take a look at the big map. Yeah, there we go. Soviet forces moving into west suburb. They're about to capture the east suburb. The Americans have the high school and the farm, and the Soviets have the drive-in. So we're going to see fighting very soon between Max and Von Small and Raid coming up on the east suburb.
One thing I'm noticing is the Americans obviously have no air players, which is really surprising. I'm used to seeing them with at least 2 air players on the map. But obviously they've changed their tactics. They're using a lot of AA, a lot of armor, just going for the big bull rush.
Well, there we go. Armor players going in the fray. Smokes popped by Raid. He's battling Max right now as we have Walk Dog for the Russian side bringing in anti-tank infantry. This is going to wreak havoc for Raid if he doesn't move his heavy tanks. And here they come. Von Small support and heavy anti-air. All they can do is go cover, but looks like Rescue's brought a sniper into the woods. He's going to attempt to pick off some of Walk Dog's troops, but no shots being exchanged yet. Raid has broken the Soviet hold on the east suburb, and that's an American property now, and the tick is going for the Americans currently.
Well, as I mentioned before, the east suburb often controls the bleed on this map. It's kind of away from the other the main battle, but it is a very important part of the battle, and most of the battle should occur over there for any good team.
Well, I've just noticed, I think the Russians took out the main bridge next to the high school to secure the west suburb for them, and they have a firm control over there. They've already put up some fortifications. The Americans have a lot of forces over near the farm, not making any moves yet. I believe they're amassing TA, trying to bide their time, but the Russians' air player Night Owl is making his way to the east suburbs, hopefully to reinforce the defenses they have there. As Raid, Rescue, and Von Small are amassing troops yet again. I think they're going to go for another push on this east suburb.
Yeah, this time they finally got some tanks to go with them. Last time they went in with AA, and that was a huge mistake. Another thing is I'm guessing that the other bridge over at Farm is probably going to take out pretty soon. And it looks like the Russians are just going to concentrate on knocking out the bridges, keeping them down, and then worrying about fortifying the east suburb.
Well, it looks like Night Owl's about to lose some of his heavy helicopters as Trekker, a little late on the hop-on, comes to PDX's rescue, but not before he loses 2 heavy tanks. So he's going to wait a little while to get those tanks back. And the Russians are sending, looks like it's Plaza sending some tanks over to the farm bridge right now. And they're just keeping the Americans on their side of the bridge. The Russians have the lead right now. They have 1 tick point to their name. And, well, we have a fuel air bomb that just went off, trying to find where it went. Looks like it was right on the farm. Oh, and there we go. The bridge has finally been taken out, along with quite a few American units. All their tanks over on the farm have been destroyed. So now it's just the only path open for them is the east suburb, and they're sending a lot of units that way, and they're going to run into some garrisoned infantry.
Yeah, well, there's only 1 tank left, but they also have another tank coming in here. Once again, like I said, the east suburb is a huge part of this map. I'm surprised the Russians haven't brought over more units to try and cover this, because obviously the Americans are making their bid for this point. They're not trying to cross the bridges here. The Russians need to really shift over some units here, otherwise they're going to lose the bleed.
Well, it looks like Night Owl's got the jump on the American armor. Hellhound's trying to pull his tanks out of there, but they're going to take some heavy losses soon. There's no anti-air in sight. Just taking a look, we got excellent use of the tactical aid from the Russian side. And there we go, Von Small using excellent airstrike, take down 3 of Night Owl's aircraft, and that's going to be a big point for them. as looks like Rescue's trying to save one of Hellhound's tanks with a little jeep. That didn't last long. Taken out. Looks like the Russians are sending up, actually they're not sending up any troops at all, or actually they are. They're amassing some tanks below the bridge in an attempt to cut around the woods and come up from the shore to retake the east suburb.
Yeah, and the Americans at the same time are just piling in more units, getting in more tanks, more AA. Really, the Russians' air player is really the guy who's trying to hold on to this point here. The Americans have taken the point, but the Russians are coming back. They're going to gray it, and but it's going to be a huge battle over here as more American tanks push in, and obviously it's going to get it to a massive battle of tanks, aircraft, and AA.
Well, right now it's a tactical aid battle at this stage up on it. The Russians and Americans, it's a slapping fight. One slaps the other, one slaps back. But looks like a lot of napalm was just dropped by the Russian side into those woods surrounding the east suburb, and it's just taken out all that infantry cover. And the Americans have a lot of tanks bundled up, and they're just begging to be tactical aid, have a tactical airstrike come at them. But Max is trying to push on and break the capture from the U.S. side. He does just that, giving the advantage back to the Russian side. But Raids just recaptured everything, and they're going to try and put up some fortifications ASAP.
As you can see, both sides are now concentrating on a lot of their units. Once again, the Americans have brought in artillery, and they're trying to knock out the Russians at their spawn and also at the circles. As a fuel air bomb drops, knocks out a ton of units, and looks like the Americans might grab this, but once again, you know, the Russians keep pouring in more unit. And it's just a free-for-all over here.
Well, it looks like Raid has the advantage in tanks on one of these points. He's going to take out all of Max's tanks, and he will capture the point if he does this. Oh, but he's running away from it. He can have a quick capture right there. There he goes. He goes back for it, and looks like we have Merc.
And while they're busy over the east suburbs, the Americans are trying to push tanks across into the west suburb, trying to knock out some fortifications while the Russians are busy over on the east suburb as well. I don't really see any other units that can oppose those tanks unless the Soviets react with their air, and just as I say that, here comes the heavy choppers.
There they go. They're going to destroy those heavy tanks. Most of them taking a lot of damage. One more salvo from these heavy choppers, and they're all gone. Looks like Hellhound's trying to reverse those tanks out of there. I don't think Night Owl's giving chase, or he might be right now. Here he comes. Is he going to get it? Oh, he's done quite a bit of damage to one of the tanks. One's just an inch from being destroyed. The Americans still have the hold, or they still do have the hold on the east suburb. Their tanks have gained a lot of veterancy right now, and they're just the Soviets can't afford to send in heavy armor one by one. They need to send in one massive group, followed up by some TAs if they want to get this point back. Americans repairing their bridges, attempting to push across. It looks like Max is massed out on amphibious transports in an attempt to retake the farm, and they're just getting destroyed right now by PDX.
Well, the ticker is slowly going back toward the American side. They're bringing in their heavy choppers. The Soviets are bringing in heavy choppers, trying to knock out as much of these fortifications as possible before the Americans get a solid hold. The Russians are really just looking here, but the main units that are trying to hold the east suburb for the Russians are infantry, and the heavy artillery from Trekker is just annihilating that infantry as it comes in.
Well, you also have to give a nod to Night Owl, who just brought in his heavy helicopters right at the right moment, right before the heavy anti-air support came in. He lost one helicopter, but he did break the hold the Americans had, and he took down all their armor and light vehicles. As he pulls away, looks like Max is pulling up with Merc. He has 2 medium tanks and 4 heavy AAs with him, along with some other light and medium tanks following up. The Soviets have been given the way to gain this territory now as the Americans retreat, or looks like this von Small pulling back his heavy air. As Raid pulls up 3 heavy tanks. They're coming through the woods. There's going to be a confrontation right now, and Merc's going to be at the bad end of the stick, or have the short end of the stick on that. As Max's medium tanks won't stand up to these heavy tanks. They're just getting pounded.
Well, the Russian chopper player seems to be a little stressed right here. Normally, I would sit all the way over on the east suburb for a good portion of time, but he's pretty much getting drawn by other units, and if the Russians can just keep their choppers there a little bit more, I'm certain that the Russians will be able to re-secure this position, as well as get a hold on that forge where the Americans are trying to cross.
Well, I think Max also needs to pull up more heavy tanks. He's sending in a lot of medium tanks, and those are just fodder when they're put up against the heavy tanks. That's just what he's just giving raid units more experience points. But here we go. Looks like Plaza's pulled up a medium tank and a heavy tank, and here comes the heavy AA. They're going to take down one of Raid's tanks, but Night Owl loses one of his heavy helicopters. He's slow to react against this heavy AA, but Von Small has one AA unit left with low health, and it's taken out. He's pulling back one of his repair tanks, but that's also taken out. So the Russians have retaken the east suburb. They have a lot of units on it. They have 3 tick points to their favor, so they can run away with this if they hold it correctly at this stage, with 8 minutes and 30 seconds left on the clock.
Yeah, as the Americans bring in infantry, but I'm also noticing the Americans are kind of being a little defensive here. You know, they've got tanks over at farm that can be used to put some pressure onto the west suburb and drag those air units away from the main battle over at the east suburb. But, you know, now the Russians have secured the east suburb. They're starting to get their AT fortifications down. Not soon after, they'll get their AA fortifications. The Americans really need to make a push here in these last 8 minutes.
Well, it looks like we have a distraction by infantry over at the east suburb. A massive infantry from rescues being sent up. And the armor from the American side is going out with little support to take the west suburb back, but it's heavily defended. A lot of anti-tank units garrisoned in buildings, along with a few heavy tanks. But I believe that's Trekker. Yeah, it's his heavy artillery. He's trying to take those heavy tanks, but he's not really aiming it correctly. He's just off by a few notches. And there we go. The Americans sending a lot of tanks, repair vehicles to the drive-in, I believe. And they're making some headway there. They're destroying quite a few of the fortifications the Soviets have set up. Night Owl bringing over heavy helicopters. And here comes Trekker trying to send in some medium AA, but they're not doing much. They're just getting picked off left and right.
Well, Plaza made a big move here by bringing in his tanks, and he's concentrating on the AA, letting the choppers work on the tanks while he knocks out the AA. Obviously, the Americans are trying to pull out their AA. They only have one AA left, and that's going to be pretty much death for the Americans once those choppers come back in.
Well, they have no AA right now. I believe they're waiting on Trekker to drop it. Well, they have one heavy anti-air vehicle, but that's not going to do much against 4 heavy helicopters who are just waiting, ready to pounce. They're waiting for Plaza, like you said, to do some damage and pick off some of these tanks. It looks like Plaza's making a move on the heavy AA, and Trekker managed to take down one heavy helicopter, but that's not enough. The Americans pushing up tanks in the middle. They've broken the Russian hold on the west suburb. Raid's done that. Has 3 heavy tanks up the middle. Von Small giving him a little support with a heavy anti-air vehicle. So the Americans breaking the hold. No one has the advantage right now, but the Russians are in the lead with 6 minutes left on the clock.
Well, actually, that was a beautiful feint. The Americans reacted very well after their attack failed over at the driveway. I believe the drive-in, and they instead put their reinforcements into the west suburb. They've got 2 of the circles right now. Obviously, all those units from the drive-in are coming back from the Soviet side, and if they can clear out that last circle, the Americans might be able to get a bleed here in the last 5.5 minutes.
Well, it looks like the amount of Soviet troops moving in is just overwhelming the American tanks that were at the west suburb, and they've beaten them all back. But it looks like American tanks again amassing near the farm. I'm not sure if they're going to use their TAs to rebuild the bridge, but it's a possibility. We haven't seen any big nuclear devices or carpet bomb TAs yet, which is odd to see. Most of the time. I believe it's the Russian team likes to send over quite a few carpet bombs.
I believe the Americans are more of the carpet bomb type, but, you know, usually in most solid matches, it's not really about the nukes or the carpet bombs. Obviously, they're good clear-out points if you're having trouble and there's just a huge, massive units. But usually in these matches, it's more of the smaller TA that really matters in the big battles.
Well, there we go. Looks like the Americans are making their move on the west suburb. Hellhound, backed up by Trekker, making their move across. They're about to take down one of Plaza's tanks. There you go. We have 5 heavy tanks. It's PDX and Hellhound. Hellhound moving out towards one of the west suburb points with very little support. It's odd to see his tanks are going to just be annihilated, I believe, by his own artillery right now. A lot of friendly fire, and Hellhound's tanks have been destroyed. But looks like PDX is bringing in a lot of reinforcements, hoping to draw some of these Russian tanks out into the open.
And I wouldn't be surprised here if Bunker Buster goes and drops on that bridge. They did an excellent job, the Russian team, of dropping that bridge just as their second string of reinforcements crossed. And, you know, the Russians are constantly blowing the bridges, and it's really delaying the reinforcements of the Americans, allowing the Russians to overwhelm, or at least give them time for the heavy choppers to come in and annihilate these tanks.
Yeah, the Russian Night Owl doing a fantastic job, but it looks like the Americans' rescue, large in part to him, have recaptured the east suburb. Rescues narrowly missing a heavy napalm strike as he tries to move his infantry towards the cover and safety of the woods, of trying to run away from these heavy helicopters. But Night Owl, distracted by PDX, is bringing all his helicopters over. Von Small moving his units away from the heavy tanks. So there's the only thing left on that assault are the support vehicles, the heavy AA. The Russians now have the bleed, and they do have the advantage still with 2.5 minutes left on the clock.
Yeah, well, the Americans are definitely going to need more than just 1 point here to get the bleed back. They need to get that east suburb as well as Gray, either west suburb or the drive-in, to really get an effective control over the bleed. Right now, it's still going for the Russian side, but if the Americans only manage to cap the east suburb, it's only going to tick over a little bit, and I don't think it's going to save them in these last 2 minutes.
Well, looks like Night Owl's changed his focus towards the east suburbs as Walk Dog moved over to the east suburbs, won the control points, and broke the American hold. And here it comes. Looks like we have Merc with heavy and medium artillery just pounding the east suburbs, and there we go. The Americans have been eliminated from the area, and this will go back to Russian hands. They have the east suburb, the drive-in, and soon to have the east suburbs, I believe.
Well, I think it's in the bag here. With the American units wiped out on the east suburb, I think the Russians are going to pull round 1 of this battle.
Yeah, definitely. The Russians do have a massive hold on the west suburb. They have all their fortifications, nearly all of them, built up. They have medium artillery by Black Seal stationed in the middle. Looks like the Russians definitely have moved towards more of a defensive role, securing their lead, not making any risky moves towards taking any of the currently held American territory.
Well, they don't really need to do anything. Oh, and then just as I say that, I hear the voice says there's a nuke coming. As it takes out the entire west suburb, looks like the Americans are going to try and rush in there, but it's only 1 minute left. I think it's a little too late.
Looks like a nuclear missile's been launched towards the American spawn point by Walk Dog, and another nuclear missile by Walk Dog just annihilated the American strike force they had amassed to retake the east suburb. It's going to get a lot of points for that. Just looking at the scoreboard, yep, there's Walk Dog on top for the Russians with 1,075, now 80 for his.
Yeah, well, obviously, you know, Walk Dog did a good job dropping those nukes, but you know, it really goes out for Plaza and Night Owl doing the armor in the air for this map. I was kind of surprised Rescue and Trekker didn't pull out on the top scores.
Well, speaking of scores, let's go ahead and do a quick score rundown while we have the time. Walk Dog, leader for the USSR side, 11,056, followed by Night Owl, 1,098, Plaza, 1,060 max, 690, Black Seal 222, the Merc 32. Over on the American side, Von Small 851, Raid 723, Rescue 710, Trekker 549, PDX 354, and Hellhound 236. Now, I'm not sure if we're going to stay on the same map or go to a different map, but this is a best of 3, and it looks like the USSR are up by 1.
Well, it is the best of 2, but it looks like, yeah, Xmas is going to be played again.
There you go. So we're back on the same map. How do you think the USA will adjust their strategies to the Russians' strategy of just taking the middle and slowly pushing east? What do you think the Americans are going to do to counteract them?
Well, they might try a huge bum rush for the east suburb, concentrate a lot more tanks with maybe a support player. They might switch back to their old strategy of using 2 air players. I noticed the Americans did not bring in any air players whatsoever during the entire match, which is kind of surprising for them. They usually come in with pairs. The Russians are just doing the same thing they've always been doing, and you know, the Americans really need to get onto a solid bum rush here. They had a lot of units separated from each other, tanks on either ends of the map, and that you really need to have 2 armor players to get a really effective push on a match.
Looks like we're just waiting on 2 players, Rescue and Nightout, to go ahead and join teams and ready up before we can get this started. So hopefully we do see a few strategy alterations by the USA, and hopefully we can see a more tight-pit battle. It was a close battle, in my opinion, at the beginning, and then the Russians just started fortifying and they just ran away with it once they beat back those initial American pushes over towards the drive-in and the west suburb.
Definitely, the Russians were more defensive than they usually are. They're usually constantly pushing, but they really didn't have to on this map. They just blew the bridges, sat back, waited for the bridges to come back up, and then they countered the attacks as the bridges came back up. They concentrated a lot of units on the east suburb, and I'm expecting the Russians to just do the same thing and concentrate on the east suburb while controlling the center and annihilating those bridges.
Alright guys, if you do have IRC, go ahead and hop on pound e-rev on the Game Surge Network, and also go ahead and visit our website www.e-rev.tv. Register for our forums. Every Tuesday we'll be doing the Total War Tuesday matchup, and we hope to get started on TGL Total Gaming League matches once those get going. So go ahead and tune into e-rev for more news about that. Still waiting on a few players to ready up before we can get going.
Looks like there's a few switches here. The 51P are switching out some players. I'm guessing Mav's going to come in. He's a solid player. Everyone is switching up players, and that's probably what we're waiting for.
Yeah, just taking a look. Have they made any substitutions yet, to your knowledge, Blazin?
I haven't seen anyone drop. I noticed Mav got in here. He might be a substitute for an armor or an infantry player, I'm guessing. So it could be Walk Dog, although I doubt it. He seems to be the commander for the Russians, since pretty much they pooled the nukes to him.
There you go. Looks like Black Seal going ahead and stepping out for the Russian team. And we've just gotten signed from Rescue. Everyone's ready up. And hopefully this next round should be started up shortly, as we just wait for Mav, Plaza, and Merc to ready up. So again, guys, remember, go ahead and hop on our website and register for the forums. Can't stress that enough. More community involvement we have, the more community feedback we get, the more things we can do, the more matches we can shoutcast, and eventually host little tournaments, all-star games, and whatnot. So just give us some love back, as I believe we're all ready, and match is going to start in 25 seconds. Going to hop back out. Alright, there we go. Countdown from 10. And we'll be able to get underway here. Remember, what was it? Kami, do you remember what sub the Russians had in for their side?
Well, it looks like they brought in Mav, and they took out Black Seal. Mav is usually an armor infantry player from my recollection, but, you know, I think Black Seal was doing armor. I'm not exactly certain. Of course, most of the players on both teams are, you know, can master each and every role, although they usually like to concentrate on the role they're best at.
Well, it looks like we have Trekker support for the Americans, PDX armor, Hellhound armor, and let's go look at their other part of their spawn. Looks like we have no air players this time, which is, I guess you should find it surprising, Kami, but Von Small is support, Rescue is armor, and Raid is armor, so no infantry for the Americans. Looks like they're going straight for caps as they take the high school, not waiting to fortify. They run across the bridge. The Russians, on the other hand, they have Night Owl Air again, sending troops to retake take the East Village. They have the drive-in, and they're not sending that many troops towards the middle, so the west suburb should be American if nothing goes wrong for them.
Well, it looks like, yeah, looks like the Russians don't really have too many tanks. Their tanks went and capped the drive-in, which is sort of surprising. I would have expected a support player to cap that, and they would have sent armor into the center, but instead it's a little bit of a vice versa, and they're going to pay for that, as the support player Mav, who is the substitute, is just getting annihilated by those tanks. There's two heavies there, and those heavy choppers for the Russians just can't get in because there's too much AA by the Americans.
Yeah, you see them, looks like Night Owl's going for like an attack and fade approach. He's moving in, firing his Hellfires, or the Russian equivalent, and pulling out, and it looks like the west suburb has gone to the Americans. I'm not sure if they're going to continue with this push or wait and fortify. What are your thoughts on their action?
Well, actually, it was a really good move concentrating on the west suburb. Obviously, you can see a lot of Russian units over at the east suburb expecting that attack. Instead, the Americans went hard for the center, and I think what really lost them that was the fact that they didn't bring armor to cap the west suburb. Instead, they used support to cap it, and that's a huge disadvantage. The Americans are going to keep piling in reinforcements until the Russians can take out those bridges and get a fortified push right back onto the west suburb. Well, as the Americans push into the drive-in as well, but heavy choppers are going to try and annihilate those tanks.
It's like the armor, a little PDX's and Hellhound's armor, a little bit outpacing their support, but here comes the support, forcing Night Owl off the attack. It looks like Walk Dog is sending a lot of anti-armor, anti-tank infantry into the woods surrounding the west suburb, possibly amassing for a counter push onto here, but there's still a lot of armor and a lot of fortifications going up as the Americans break the drive-through hold with tanks and support. They're just battling one anti-tank fortification, and the Merc has quite a few AAAs over there that are going to be taken out quickly once PDX gets his armor over there. And here it comes, the mass, and there we go, Plaza with a cluster bomb. Not sure where that landed. It landed near the east suburb, and he took, guess he knocked out quite a few support vehicles.
Well, definitely the Americans, you know, they did exactly what I said you needed to do on a match push. That's 2 armor players plus a support player, and just hard, long, you know, push right for the center or push right for east suburb. And they went for the center, feinted the Russians, and it looks like, you know, the Americans have got this in the bag if they can keep the pressure up and keep the Soviets back at their spawn.
Well, it looks like Night Owl's is running around to the American spawn, hoping to catch some armored players off guard when they come in. That might work out for them. The Americans, the Soviets broke the American hold on the west suburb, but they've just retaken it back. But Walkdog has quite a few anti-infantry units around the west suburb, so the Americans are going to have to deal with that. But they do have tremendous bleed right now, and they may go ahead and get a total cap out if the Soviets can't change something quickly.
Yeah, the Russians really need to switch over a lot of units. Obviously, they did a mass spawn here, concentrating a lot of tanks and so forth. The Russians haven't really had need for their support players right now, since the Americans have no aircraft to speak of. So they really need to switch one of these support players or an infantry player to armor to counter all this AA, because the heavy choppers of the Russians, who the Russians rely on a lot for their defensive strategies, are just getting rattled by all this American AA.
Well, it looks like the Mark's getting a few good hits with his medium artillery into PDX, but not enough to really make a difference, as Trekker's trying to maneuver his AA to hopefully take down a few of Night Owl's choppers. Americans still with fortifications holding on to the drive-through. They're up against a tough battle near the west suburb, as the Soviets have 4 heavy tanks and Walkdog's anti-tank infantry in there, and they did lose control of the drive-in just as I was talking, so the Soviets have regained that, and just in the nick of time they only have a little bit of their domination on the bar, so they have to do something to get back into the game. There's 14 minutes left on the clock.
Well, the Americans actually, I noticed here, is from what I'm guessing, they kind of tried to concentrate their reinforcements. Instead of just piling in one tank after the other, just constantly reinforcing, they tried to just go in bundles. And when you're trying to counter a huge Soviet attack, a nuke goes off right in the center, knocks out all the Soviets just as I'm saying that, and the Americans push in with tanks, and I'm guessing there's going to be AA soon to follow, but the Russians have brought in their own tanks. Obviously, that second nuke that was dropped in the Russian spawn could probably have been used to knock out those tanks at the drive-in, but instead they tried to use it, I'm guessing, on artillery or something.
Well, Russians also knock out the farm bridge, so that's stopping Hellhound from sending his units over to support the middle push. But Raid is there, along with Trekker and Rescue with their armor, and there we go, a fuel air bomb delivered by Walkdog, taking out a few of Raid and Rescue's tanks. And it looks like Von Small doing quite a number on Night Owl, forcing his heavy helicopters out of the fight, as Raid and it's just Raid and Trekker and Von Small try to take the west suburb. There's 2 Soviet heavy tanks there, but just support players can't deal with them. Just gonna have to wait for some more armor to drop in.
More armor is coming. They really need to knock this bridge out, the Soviet team at the high school, because you have tanks from Rescue. That's usually what I see Rescue in on pub servers, as well as whenever I play with him, and he usually is a very good armor player, and he's just pouring those tanks right into the center. The Russians are probably going to cap this with more tanks coming in to the west suburb to grab that last circle, but the Russians have come back from this, and with 12 minutes left, they can pretty much push on some other points. Looks like they've got infantry trying to put a push onto the high school as well, and the Russians do get the bleed. With 12 minutes left, the Russians can pull back.
Well, there we go. The Russian Walkdog sending 1 anti-tank infantry in. Knocks out an anti-air fortification. Not sure if he's going to send those guys to the high school or whatnot, but looks like Raid and Von Small heading towards the bridge. There's no bridge for them out of the high school area. It was knocked out, and there we go. Just as I spoke, bridge has been repaired, and here come the tanks. Not sure if they can retake it this time. There's Plaza has a lot of tanks in the area, along with check if there we go. Mav and Plaza both have a lot of heavy tanks in the area, and there we go. Mav called in a great tank buster and just dominated all of Raid, Rescues, and Von Small's tanks. So that was an excellent TA use right there.
Yeah, that was excellent TA strike right there. Another thing is Walkdog is putting pressure onto the high school, and while the American tankers are trying to push into the center, And the Russians are just saving up their TA for the bridges. They're not even worrying about too much of any other TA. Obviously, you know, Mav dropped that tank buster, but for the most part, they're just concentrating on the bridges, although it is cheaper to rebuild a bridge than it is to knock it out.
I guess they might be banking on the fact that the Americans are using more TA than they can generate at this stage. The Russians do have the fortification build up on the west suburb. They have the majority of tanks there. And the Americans right now, Hellhound and PDX, are pushing across the bridge with a lot of heavy tanks, but they still have to contend with Night Owl's heavy attack helicopters. He has 3 of them roaming. There's no anti-air support for Hellhound or PDX. I'm not sure Night Owl notices that yet, but when he does, it's going to spell doom for these tanks that are left out there. As well, we have the Merc plane artillery, and he's just not doing that much initial damage, but all those shells add up, and it's just stopping this push by PDX and Hellhound.
Yeah, definitely. You know, one of the weak things about the American strategy of pushing into the center is the fact that they have to rely on those bridges. There are no other forwards. The only forward in this map is the one over the east suburb, and with these bridges constantly getting knocked out, even though they're wasting more TA than the Americans, like you said, they're betting on the fact that, you know, the Americans aren't getting as much TA as they are.
Well, it looks like rescue, yeah, going off that, they are betting on that fact. It looks like the Americans are, that's probably one of the reasons. They might have the TA for it, but right now they don't have the units for it. They just don't have the units, or they don't have the tactical aid they need to mount a strike. If they had a nuclear bomb or a carpet bomb like they normally do, they could knock out the majority of those Soviet tanks and retake it, but right now it looks like their focus has shifted to the east suburb, and again, Night Owl with these heavy attack helicopters has found a tank group undefended as they pop smoke, but finally Von Small coming up for some support. But Walk Dog's anti-tank infantry near the high school has been taken out, but not before it completely annihilated the fortifications around one point at the high school.
Well, one thing that the... Go ahead.
Go on.
The Russians, you know, always use heavy choppers. They almost never go medium choppers. One thing the Americans usually do to counter that is they have 2 air players, and one of them is always medium air. The other one usually switches off between heavy air and medium air, and I think, you know, that's what's really keeping the Americans down from making these solid pushes, because the tanks push ahead of their AA, and they get wiped out first before, you know, the American AA can catch up to annihilate those choppers.
Well, I'm just noticing Walk Dog's doing a fantastic job at the east suburbs with his anti-tank infantry. No, every time he loses a squad, he's guaranteed to at least take out 2 heavy tanks or severely damage them. And he's been using the first really well and the buildings. And you know, he's not doing that yet. Doesn't have them that much in combat, but they're garrisoned strategically all around the map. He has them set up in case the high school bridge is repaired. He has 2 squads of anti-tank infantry there. And it looks like the Soviets have put most of their units towards retaking or supporting the east suburb. Taking another look around the map, no Soviet push towards the farm, which could be an easy cap for them if they just sent in 1 full squad of heavy tanks, but they are trying to stop the American push up onto the east suburb.
Well, it really only takes, you know, like a cluster bomb plus a paradropped unit to decap one of those points. And, you know, both the Americans have really left high school and farm, you know, very light. They're concentrating heavy on the east suburb, but the Russians did an excellent job of countering that. I'm guessing they saw it coming probably with an aerial recon, you know, the Americans are just going in line, you know, fashion. They just one big column going to the front line. They need to really just concentrate in one big bob and just push all together. But they're just getting annihilated by a combination of choppers, tanks, and AA.
Well, looks like Von Small's just deployed a heavy artillery, but yeah, the Americans have the advantage. They're losing it now, and as you said, they're just lining their units up. Units into the fray, units like lambs to slaughter, so to say, as most of these Soviet tanks have gained a high amount of veterancy, and there we go. Looks like Hellhound has finally pulled out the heavy helicopters as he attempts to thwart a massive Soviet armor push, and he's going to rank up these helicopters really quickly as Max and Plaza aren't turning these tanks around. They're just pushing them forward.
Well, this is an excellent time to have two, heavy air players for the American side. Just switch up roles, go heavy air, because right now, the Soviets have no AA. They put all their support guys into artillery duty. You're noticing lots of medium and heavy artillery putting fire on the side points. This is an excellent time for the Americans to switch to heavy air.
Well, I've most noticed the Soviets are sending a lot of their artillery fire over to the farm, and they're just not doing that much direct damage, but they're whittling away at these fortifications, and I'm sure they're going to recon the area, and once they see one down, one paratroop division could just spell the end for the Americans. But the Americans, as you pointed out for them before, they're finally amassing a large number of troops, but I believe they have more support than they do tanks, so I'm not sure how this is going to work out. Still just one heavy helicopter player, that's Hellhound. And Rescue's saying the bridges are bugged, so I'm not sure if that means, they can't be repaired or what's wrong with them. But the Americans are focused towards the East Farm now, as looks like Hellhound's making his push over.
Well, I'm not exactly certain about that. It could be something with the TA, but or just, he doesn't notice that the Russians keep knocking him out as the bridges come back online.
Well, it looks like the Russians have made the move. Night Owl and Night Owl's dropped in, called in 2 light tanks, paradropped them in, and now he's going to retake the farm, and this is going to be a great move for the Soviets. They're in the lead with 4.5 minutes left to go in the round. What can the Americans do at this stage to come back and win, Kami?
Well, obviously they need to get East Suburb here. It's a big thing. Oh, and just as that happens, their heavy choppers, the real needed arsenal on that point, gets knocked out. In addition to that, they really need to bring some units back over to farm. They just abandoned that farm, and the Soviets are notorious for pushing for light points. And once they see a light point open, they go right for it. So they need to get the East Suburb here as well as the farm and retake that. There's only a couple light tanks there that were dropped in.
Well, it looks like they will take the East Suburb. I think they have the momentum and the units to do so. With Trekker's large amount of heavy AA, Night Owl's not going to be over there anytime soon. But again, they're just abandoning their points. If you look at the high school, there's no fortifications. A paradrop could just break that right now. Taking a look at the farm, looks like Night Owl's tanks are just going to sit there and fortify the point. But again,
yeah.
The Soviets are sitting good right now.
Yeah, the last 3 minutes here, 5 minutes ago, I would have thought the Americans could have come back here, beat the Russians, and taken the East Suburbs, possibly the farm back. But, 3 minutes left, it's not looking like that. The Russians are just, trying to fortify all their points right now, putting a lot of units into the East Suburb, and that's pretty much where the battle's going to end, probably.
I'm just taking a look. There we go. Walkdog calling down precision artillery strike, breaking an American attempt to capture on those points. And the Russians definitely have the bleed on the Americans. I don't see them coming back from this. All their armor is pretty much destroyed. There's no medium air, so to speak, to help take down these Russian helicopters, which I think that would have made a big difference if someone ran a few medium air helicopters to keep Night Owl down. I think that could have made a big difference. Looking at the scoreboard, he's one of the top scorers for his team, and for good reason. He's been doing a good job picking off lone American tank squads. And
well, that air roll is usually what I usually do whenever I play for the 51P, and the Russians rely, like I said, heavily on those heavy choppers to knock out stuff that they can't handle. And I usually, whenever I played against the 186, my biggest worry was never the AA, it was always the medium choppers. But instead, the Americans decided not to go for their 2 air players.
I think that definitely would have made a difference. I mean, the initial push by the Americans was a good idea, good strategy. They took a lot of their grounds, but when they started losing units, they didn't bring in any of the heavy AA, like you said, because most of the Russian players had switched out from support AA to tanks and infantry, and had the Americans brought in the heavy helicopters at that stage, along with a few mediums, they would have really had the ability to take control of this map with the air units being such dynamic units that they are.
Yeah, and the Americans are just switching pretty much to artillery here. I'm guessing they're just going to drop a nuke or something to try and end this match with a little dignity here.
There you go, Trekker Von Small with 2 artillery, as you pointed out. But Americans making one last-ditch effort towards the east suburb. They know it's over by now. There's no way they can come back. The Russians taking a look. They have a fully fortified farm, fully fortified east and drive-through, and they have some fortifications left on the east suburbs. So Americans only holding 1 point. The high school. Oh, and they just lost control of that. Thanks to, was it Mav? I believe he airdropped 2 light tanks in. So now the bleed's on heavy. The Americans have no points. They can run in right now and snag these suburb if they try to, but there's 10 seconds left on clock. I don't think any units will be able to make it in time.
No, it looks like the Russians were trying to go for a cap out here with that last cap, rather, just annihilate the Americans before the ticker goes out. But obviously, the Soviets leave here with a 95% victory. Night Owl takes the top. Like I said, those heavy choppers are the key for the Russian strategy. And of course, following up is Mav and Plaza with their armor. And if you notice, there's 3 armor players over with the Soviets. Like I said, not very much AA. Finishing up Max 754, Walk Dog 594, the Merc 155, and for the American side, leading up once again, Choppers Hellhound 974, Vaughn at 648, Raid at 6, PDX S12, and I didn't get Rescue and Trekkers.
Well, from the talk in team chat, I guess the bridge is bugged. I mean, I saw it repaired earlier, but I guess there's only a certain amount of times it can be repaired, so that's clearly a bug, and I can see where that really would hinder an American assault up the middle. But, as you said earlier, Americans choosing not to run any air players, and, you see the Soviets right off the bat expecting that with a lot of anti-aircraft players.
Well, air would have been a huge advantage for the Americans since the bridges are down if they went air. Because air players can drop in units, and that's a key thing right there, is that they can use their TA to drop in units and cover the points with their and do most of the killing with their aircraft. That's how usually most good air players fight battles. And I'm not sure they're going to be fighting a 3rd round here, as it looks like everyone's leaving.
Yes, the Soviets did come out on top on this one. I thought it might go into a 3rd round on the 2nd time we played Xmas, but a quick strategy change by the Soviets turned that around, turned it into their victory. So we'll go ahead and sign out right now. So it is best 2 out of 3. The Soviets did just that. So let's go ahead and log off. Tune in next Tuesday, and don't forget to visit our website, www.e-rev.tv, and visit our RC channel on the Game Search Network, pound e-rev. Do you have any closing comments?
Well, I hope to see the Americans come back after this one.
Alright, there you have it, folks. Have a good evening, and we'll see you next Tuesday.